Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast series, Leading at the Intersection of Business, Innovation, and Law. I'm Lucy Saddleton, Managing Editor at the Legal Innovation Forum. Brought to you in association with Clio, this episode features a dynamic keynote conversation from the Legal Innovation Forum, Toronto 2026. Richard Florida, author, urbanist, professor, and founder of the Creative Class Group, is joined by Kathleen Killin, Senior Director, Enterprise Marketing at Clio, to discuss the future of the legal profession and the vital importance of human creativity.
So we're going to dive right in. So Richard, you spent your career studying how technology reshapes work and cities. When you look at what AI is doing right now, is this any different, or is it the latest chapter in a story that we've seen before?
Well, it's a big deal, but you've given me another story to tell because you said a room full of lawyers. So I grew up, and this is important to what we're talking about. I grew up working class in New Jersey. I realized the other day, my brother, we're trying to get EU citizenship. My brother sent me my great-grandparents' birth certificates, and they were illiterate, that someone had to sign for them. Mm-hmm. My grandparents came to the United States in 1890. My parents were born in the 20s. My dad lived through kind of the last part of the Industrial Revolution and the impact of technology, but here's my funny story. So I was the first person in my family, extended family, so that's 7 pairs of aunts and uncles on each side, 14 on each, so 28, to go to college, and I had dozens of, and you know, like when you're first kid in an extended immigrant family, ethnic family, the parents and everybody, they wanted me to be a doctor. And they really did, and I did terrible. I couldn't do science very well. I did terrible in biology. So when I went home for that first semester, they called a family meeting, and they brought like 50 people to our little house near New Jersey, and to implore me. And then they said, you don't want to be a doctor, you can be a dentist. And I'm like, you do not want me working on anybody's mouth. So I blurted out, I could be a lawyer. And my mom said, you're absolutely right, Richard. You're a really good talker. You reminded me, that's right, really good. So yeah, I think this is bigger. Now, don't get me wrong. You know, for most of our time on Earth, we were agrarian, right? We worked on farms, and we lived where we worked. Some of us were nomadic, but basically, we lived and worked in the same place. Our community was the same, our friends, and you know, even during the Industrial Revolution, yeah, we then worked in factories. For most of that time, people walked, mm-hmm. even in Toronto or Pittsburgh, people walked to the factory. My dad, when he got his first job, when he had to leave 7th grade to help support the family, he walked to the factory. And then people moved a little further afield. You know, they moved to suburbs. In my lifetime, that happened, right? That happened in my parents moved to the suburbs when I was a little boy. I think AI is bigger. I think it's bigger than what we thought about digital technology and the internet, which were pretty disruptive. I think AI is bigger because it changes everything. One, it's for you know, and all of those were disruptive with regard, right? All of those cost a lot of jobs, right? For most of human history, all of us lived or worked on farms. Now, you probably don't know this, right? 1% of Americans or Canadians work on farms, less than 1%. And then most people work like my dad in factories or in manufacturing and supportive. Now, less than about 12% of people work in anything manufacturing related, less than 5% of people work in factories. So I think what we're dealing with now is this shift to use AI to really supplement cognitive or knowledge work. That's a big disruption. It will certainly eliminate some jobs, and it will certainly create others. But yeah, I think we're living through it. You know, we've never lived through something, like history always looks compressed. You know, 100 years goes like, whoa. It's very interesting to live through one of these disruptions. So yeah, I think it could be bigger because in those cases we were doing physical work and the physical work changed. Now we're working with our minds and the way we do knowledge work is changing. So I think it's pretty darn big.
It's funny you say about your family and the being illiterate. So my great-grandparents, we actually found their baptismal records as well because we were applying for UK citizenship, and there was a big X because they couldn't write their names.
Yep. And think about how that wasn't that long ago. That was like 100 years ago.
No, it wasn't. And same with my grandparents walking to work, living. We were just talking about living in living in a walkable city. I walk my kids to school, to daycare, everywhere, and how it is changing in our day to day. And I'll just make a point, as I am walking my kids to school, in the background, I have co-work working at home, giving me my morning update and going through all of we were just talking about this, about I gave you my prompt. That is looking at my Gmail, looking at my calendar, looking at competitive intelligence, my Slack, my saved for later that came in either through the evening or the day before. And what I have is I've got my prompt going in a scheduled prompt so that every morning when I get back to my desk after drop off, I have priorities as well as drafted messages that I could be sending out, which I think, like, I'm a mom of 4, that is such a huge, huge aspect for me, because then I don't have that extra hour where I'm trying to triage before I can actually start my day. Okay, so the next question is, the AI debate, it seems stuck in extremes. It's either salvation or catastrophe. You've argued that reality lives in the gray. Where is that gray specifically for the legal profession?
Well, you know much, I mean, you guys have done the best work, right? You've done the best surveys. I've read your surveys of the effect of AI in the legal profession and who uses it, who doesn't use it, do firms use it, do people use it, more lawyers use it than firms. But, you know, it's really interesting. I've been involved in this for a year, right? I've been using AI maybe 15 months. And the reason I started using AI is my students said I should. Right? I didn't want to use it. I'm pretty technophobic. I was a late adopter of everything. Email, social media. I didn't want a smartphone. I wanted to keep my flip phone. Like, my wife forced me to get a smartphone.
So did your plan say to you that, sorry, you have to upgrade, we don't support this anymore?
Yeah. And so I've always been kind of slow to adopt. And my students last year were like, you need to use this technology. And then, just back then, there was a lot of positive, right? It was seen as something that was really positive. You should use it. Now, I think I'm very positive on AI. But Lord God, did you guys watch those commencement speeches? Woo! I mean, to see so many people get booed like that. And when you think about it, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a weatherman, you know, or Bob Dylan quote, to know which way the wind blows. I mean, young people today look up and they say, it's hard to figure out how I'm going to live a great life, right? How am I ever going to afford to buy a house? And that was a big concern. And now it's like, what happened to my career? You know, first of all, I got screwed by, you know, COVID screwed up my high school experience, my early college experience. Now I'm graduating college or going to law school or business school or whatever. And now AI is coming to take my job away. So we get this huge backlash. And it doesn't help that I want to be kind to my fellow high technologists and venture capitalists, but you couldn't have crafted better textbook villains than some of these guys. I mean, they literally look like they're out of like central casting because they're so tone deaf with regard. They don't understand how to even communicate. That said, I mean, in my own life, I think that's the best way to talk about it. I think it's the most liberating thing I've ever used. Mm-hmm. Now, again, I'm established in my career. I have a large network. I have a quote-unquote reputation, kind enough to read my bio. So that creates some status and stature and authority that you can leverage. But, you know, I'll give you my own story. I write articles and books. It really sucks. It is really horrible work. I mean, writing a book, I can't think of anything more horrible than writing a book. It's, you know, what did they say? It's like sitting at the typewriter and taking a knife and like slicing open your veins, that famous quote. But the horribleness of it is mainly assembly, right? It's assembling all of these inputs, research documents, academic papers, technical material that your research assistants do, interview transcripts and case studies and site visits. And so writing a book to me would take years, but 80 to 90% of that would be assembly. Now with the use of AI, that is completely flipped. I would say, and 10 to 20% of it would be any kind of creativity on my part, the limited amount I have. Now it's like the assembly, I'm writing a new book, I assembled it in 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, I worked pretty hard. I worked 8 to 12 hour days every day. But I assembled it very quickly, and so I think it's inverted. Now, only 10 to 20% of my work is about assembly, and 80 to 90% is creative. And I can tell, like when I write opinion pieces for the Globe and Mail, the New York Times, or the Financial Times, or the Wall Street Journal, they're getting better response. And that's not because I'm any smarter. It's because more of my relative effort is going into the creative piece and the argument and the structure, and less of my energy is being used just to assemble stuff. So yeah, I think it's incredibly liberating in many respects. We can talk about more stories. I think it also gives you the ability to engage in things you otherwise might have been scared to do or don't feel you have the skills to do.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of creativity, you founded the theory of the creative class. And in our conversation on Friday, it's interesting. Lawyers are creative, of course. I'm not going to take that away from all of us. We're very creative beings in our drafting of our arguments or of our, all of our contracts or whatever it may be.
Extremely creative.
But initially, when someone says to me, "Oh, a lawyer's a creative person," I think, wait a second, that's actually an artist or a musician or whatever it may be. So you describe lawyers as being these knowledge workers, part of what you call the creative class. What does that framing tell us about how AI will actually land in this profession?
So yes, lawyers are full-fledged members of the creative class. And I created this term 20 years ago when I was living in Pittsburgh and teaching at Carnegie Mellon. And I was trying to understand the beginnings of this transformation from the industrial age that I grew up in, where people worked in factories or in large industrial complexes, where most people did that kind of work, to a new kind of knowledge society where more people worked with their minds. And what typically they thought of as knowledge workers were scientific and technical workers. And I'm not that smart, but I said, farmers work on farms, manufacturing people work in factories with their physical labor, knowledge workers, a term invented by the great management theorist Peter Drucker, work with their minds. So let's do a list. And fortunately, I was at Carnegie Mellon. We had a big data center with all this data on occupations and employment. And these kids were really good at running the numbers. There's over 1,000 occupations in the US. And I said, let's look at the ones that use knowledge. And it came out being like business, finance, and management, engineering and science, technology, innovation, research and development, law, healthcare, academic, arts, culture, music. So then I had to come up with a name for that. Mm-hmm. And I said, what is the interesting thing about these people that use their minds? They use their creativity. But I think the lawyer story that you're saying is that a lot of your time was spent assembling things, right? A lot of your time was assembling case histories, mm-hmm. looking through case law. And I think that's why we have the image of so many knowledge workers as just crunching through. But there's a guy named Peter Turchin. He's really interesting. And I find this just fascinating. He has a theory of when societies change. And his theory of society is not Marxian. It's not when the proletariat gets angry, the workers get angry and overthrow the capitalists. He says societies change when there is elite overproduction. Have any of you heard this term before? Elite overproduction means you're producing a lot of really smart kids coming out of good colleges that either can't get jobs or can't get the jobs that they want. That happened, in the 1890s. That happened again in the 1930s. That actually happened again when I was a very young boy in the 1960s. And he said that's especially the case when lawyers can't get jobs. But his point is that lawyers are really good, not just at legal problems, but at organizing people, civic activism, mm-hmm. making new policy. I'm like, holy shit. And when I read that recently, not when I wrote this book, I read that like in the past 2 months, that lawyers are active agents of social change when they feel society is not in their interest and the interest. So there's no more creative act than that kind of social transformation.
So we're loudmouths.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say we're opinionated, we're loud, yeah.
Well, so this is what my mother was saying. I actually think, we didn't even talk about this, and it's not in any of my research. I've tried to do many things, and I've stunk at all of them. I tried to be an athlete. I was terrible. I thought I was going to be a rock and roll guitar player. I'm okay. I'm an okay academic and writer. I'm a pretty good public speaker. I've never trained for it. I've never taken a course. I've never studied it. I actually think what you said, loudmouth, the ability to project yourself, to make an argument verbally, that is a really important skill, and one that's becoming more important as we move from a text-based culture to a video-based culture. You know, until you said that, but yeah, I think that for something, both selection effect, the people who are attracted to the law are good at it, but also the people who succeed in it have to have the ability, rightly, or, you know, either innately or through training, to be able to make a cogent argument. So I think that's a big part. I want to go back to AI. I actually think that's the skill. And, you know, I was telling Kathleen, I'm involved in like 3 or 4 big research projects now on the effects of AI on people, the kinds of people that will succeed in an era of AI, and the kind of cities that will win the competition. We can talk more about that if you want. But the one thing that comes up time and time again is the ability not just to prompt, but to ask unique questions. So let me tell you a story of something that I did. I'm writing this book, and the book is on what's happening to cities and the way we live and work as the result of AI and digital technology. It'll be out in about 9 months. If I got to finish it, I got to send it in September, it'll probably be out in January, February, March of next year. And I wanted to calculate the possible economic benefit to society, to the world, of a better allocation of people, corporate resources, corporations, and places. So if you need more people to live in Toronto, having them be able to afford. If people should live in other areas, being able to move. If people should live more in San Francisco around AI companies and entertainment in New York and Los Angeles, or even more importantly, if there's a lot of people in India or Malaysia or the emerging economies who have skills and talent and can't participate either because they're remote or because of sexism, racism, discrimination, what is the gain to society? I called it a geographic dividend. I asked my research team to do it, of course. They drag their heels, as all good research teams do. I am cooperating with people from BCG. I asked them to have their research team do it. They said, we'll do it in the summer. So one afternoon, I sat there with Claude, and I said, here's how I want to calculate the geographic dividend. I cannot use a spreadsheet. I have no technical ability. I said, I want you to go back and read papers by Enrico Moretti, all these things that bear on this. And I want you to come up with an estimate. You know, we sat there for most of the afternoon going back and forth. What should I read? What should you read? And it came out and it gave me like 10 sheets of paper that I couldn't, with all these betas and sigmas, I couldn't understand one freaking word. And it said the estimate is between $3.5 to $11.5 trillion. So I said, that's great, but I can't put that in my book. Claude made that up, right? I'm going to get canned. You know, so for a month I sat there, and then one day I said, I know really smart economists. What if I sent them a note and say, do you have a graduate student that could help me, or could you help me? I sent a note to a guy at Harvard. He said, talk to this guy at Chicago. I sent a note to the guy. This is all in the same afternoon. It's a rainy Saturday. Sent a note to the guy at University of Chicago. He said, it's not me. It's my student who works at the San Francisco Federal Reserve. I sent the guy a note. He said, I know your work. I know your book. You wrote a jacket blurb for my dad. I'm like, Nirvana. The guy reads. He says, call me Monday. We set up a Zoom. He's like, your estimate is pretty close. The higher end bound is off. Send Claude 5 papers from the World Bank on, 5 different, he showed me what they were. We came back with an estimate between $3.5 and $5 trillion. He said, your estimate is well calibrated. You probably can publish that. Now, I don't know if I'm going to publish it. I'm certainly going to have other research teams look at it, but I could have never done that. In a million years, I would have never been able to do that. And what I found is, do you guys know who Mark Andreessen is? From Andreessen Horowitz. Did you see what he said recently about what's happening in technology among the technology workforce? There used to be a fight between, I don't know if I'll get these right, software developers, I don't know if it was project managers or project designers, and like the salespeople. And he's like, now they all have the same skills. And they're merging into one occupation. That with AI, those occupations are merging into one occupation he called builder, which I thought was really cool. I think that's kind of the effect. If you have the ability to ask the right questions, know your domain space, you can add other skills. Now, you still need other people to help you embed it, and fact-checking becomes really important, but I think it supplements, for people who can ask really good questions, it becomes an incredible aid.
So shifting a little bit and looking at that at the end about this idea of the builder and of the future and training for future practitioners, that's something that we hear time and time again, specifically when we're thinking of, I know that the law firm 2030, I think that's a panel coming up later on this afternoon. And we hear this, every conference has something about what is the future of law going to look like? How are we going to be training future lawyers? And I know my friends in academia that are at law schools today, they are just, people are still stumped. They're saying, do we just cut out AI totally, or do we train them on AI? And so looking at this idea of assembly and then structuring and mobilizing people, how would you recommend the firms of the future to assist in training the lawyers of the future?
Well, let's start at the high level and go down. First of all, you can't ban it. You can't. I mean, in an educational environment, the kid told me to use it.
Yeah.
Before I knew what they were doing, they were using it. And what are you going to do? Say, don't use it? How are you going to find out if they're using it? I mean, they're going to use it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. So you can try to ban it, and I get it. But like, my kids use it. My kids are 9 and 10. They use it all the time. And you know, we're at a party the other day, a birthday party, and this mom was complaining. She's Jewish and very religious, and you know, wants her daughter to be really prepared at her bat mitzvah. And the rabbi was very difficult. And the daughter was like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to talk to that rabbi. He's a jerk. I don't like him. I'm not going to go. And she said they sat down with AI one day, and it was like, poof, the whole world opened up. And we hear these stories over and over. I use it with my own kids in a structured environment. I think you have to be able to work with it. But I think the deeper question you're asking is, what about education? Mm-hmm. I'm a college professor. I have a PhD. I'm supposedly smart, supposedly. I don't know if I am. There's not one day of school I ever liked. I hated every single minute of school. I did not go. I mean, I did as much as I could avoid school and cut school, I did not go. Now, how can you love to learn and love ideas and love to read but hate school? That's telling me something. And I can tell you, now, I've never been in law school. I've watched the TV shows. It looks great, by the way. But in my class, it's disheartening. You know, I'm teaching graduate students at elite universities. Most of them don't talk. Most of them are looking at a screen. Most of them are looking at a computer. Most of them don't do their reading. Most of them want you to give, what's the biggest complaint? You don't show enough PowerPoint slides. Why would I show a PowerPoint slide? We're going to have a conversation. And there are 2 or 3 students every time that are super engaged and you focused on them. Something's broken in the way we educate, and it's inert. As much as you try to change it, there's so many obstacles, but I think this is the forcing function. We've got to figure out a way to train people that develops human capabilities, that develops their creativity. My great friend, the late Ken Robinson, the greatest student of creativity, he said, we've developed an education system that squelches the creativity out of kids. It just takes that creativity and squelches it out of them. So yeah, I think now we have the opportunity to redesign it. You know, I think for kids especially, not just legal training. You know, actually, I hate to say this, and I don't know about law school. Certainly what I've seen, when you go up the ladder, it gets worse. Like from elementary school to high school to university to graduate school. Graduate school to me was horrific. It was terrifying because they didn't want you to do anything new. They just wanted you to follow the rules, be like them. So yeah, I think we have to develop an education system, and we have the opportunity to develop an education system. You know, the story I like, 2 stories I like to tell is first when I asked my kids what they wanted to be when they would grow up. When they were 6 and 7, they said YouTubers.
Yeah.
And I thought they were loony, and then I looked at it and I said, oh shit, they're way smarter than me. Yeah. These YouTubers have skills that are, you know, that are really interesting and important, and they're gravitating. But you know, I was at a forum, I'm going to do another one in New York, a dinner. What's really interesting is the AI companies, as you know, are massively concentrating, right? More than any other technology, they're massively concentrating in cities like San Francisco has 70% of global investment in AI startups. No, 60% of global investment in AI technology, and 70% of North American. And so I was at a dinner with a guy who's the leading venture capitalist investing in AI startups in the world. And he's like, yeah, my daughter's graduating high school. I said, where's she going to go to college? He's like, NYU or something. He's like, I have no idea what she should study. No idea. Like, no idea what I should tell her to study. I have no clue. I have no clue what she should do. And, you know, I blurted out, and he loved my answer. I said, tell her to study hospitality. You know, a major that no one ever would have thought was a good major, right? Everyone thought hospitality, that's like working in a hotel. Nothing wrong with that for the people who work. But I thought anything that teaches you people, anything that teaches you the ability to client, to work with people, it's something that's useful. He's like, that's a darn good idea. I'm going to go back and tell her that. So I think it's really, that's the bigger thing. How do we develop young people? And then for you all, I think most of us will be fine. The hard thing is what happens to the people who are coming up through the system now, right? And how do they find their way? What are the skills we'd like to see? I have some ideas. You're going to know, you're going to have some ideas. What are the kind of skills that you think you need in the next generation of people who would, you know, replace us as we get older? I think that's the big question that we should try to answer.
So building on that, when we talk about the skills, and this is something, of course, that comes up, is junior lawyers, a lot of people say, well, they've got to put their time in. They have to just, the way you're going to learn how to spot something in a contract is you just have to read 10,000 contracts. And you have to just do the work, do the diligence, whatever it may be. With AI taking over that type of work, what would your recommendation be then to these firms? Or what would your recommendation be to some of these junior lawyers?
It's like on the one hand, on the other hand, right? And so I hate to see young people have to do this. I hate to see my nieces and nephews sitting in a faceless office in an office building from 7 or 8 in the morning. You know, if they're MBA, if they're out of place, I go until midnight, you know. I hate that. I think it's horrible. I think they should have a youth. I think they should, you know, so I think, yeah, the technology will get rid of, at least alleviate some of that grunt work. That said, I think people need a base of knowledge. If you don't have a base of knowledge, if you don't know the field, if you couldn't prompt like I did about the geographic dividend, if you didn't know, I didn't know how to make the mathematical estimate, but I knew what to ask. I think you need a broad base of knowledge. So yeah, now some of that can be supplemented. Technology can make that easier. Maybe you don't have to read I never read every page. I speed read. I went very quickly. I tried to get the gist of it. Maybe AI can help with that, but I think you need a base of knowledge. What I hear from people making these decisions at important law firms, important consulting firms, important investment banks, what I hear because in these conversations with AI companies, what we're really doing, so these are the real estate firms that build and place people in the new headquarters in places like New York City, who are building the offices of the future. So they're very interested in what a company might need, what its hiring are, what its build out might look like. So what I'm hearing is, they don't just want to hire for people who have good grades or good quantitative or cognitive or good skills as expressed in a report card. They also know that they don't need the kind of up or out vetting that they had before. What they're trying to do is hire to replace them. So they're looking for people in your field who have great client engagement skills, have the ability to do sales when that's needed, can do PR and marketing, can communicate they're looking for people with a wide array of intellectual skills, but the intellectual skills used to be predominant, the cognitive skills. Now these other skills, the ability to ask good questions, the ability to engage clients, the ability to project, the ability to communicate your ideas, all of those have gone up. And it hasn't really massively affected hiring. It just means that the hiring profile is very different.
And what about those that are, sorry, I'm going off script, but what about those that are mid in their career? So because this is something that my friends and I talk about, is that we still have 20 years ahead of us, at least. Working. And so I was like, I have 4 kids to put through university and wedding and college and whatever. Anyways, that's another story. But what about us that retirement's not there yet, but we're not starting off? Where do we fit in? Because that's something that I grapple with a lot.
So I'm going to, again, I think we are going through one of the most, if you had asked me, like what my father lived through, you know, he's born at the tail end of, almost the tail end of World War I, after he was born in the 1920s. So and he was the youngest. My parents were both the youngest of 7. So their parents, Spanish flu, aunts and uncles had the flu, childhood diseases. My dad basically gets settled in the factories off to World War II, lives through the Depression, World War II. Like, that's the way life was. Mm-hmm. You know, I think about what my grandparents endured. Life was always disrupted. We just never lived through it. And in a way, I'm not happy that we had to suffer through a pandemic. I'm not happy that we're going through this global disruption now, but it is a really important part of being human. I also think we'll manage it better. As horrible as it looks right now, I don't think we're going to have like a World War III. I don't think we're going to nuke one another. But I think it's a very interesting period to live through, and we should all look at it that way. I think it's better. I mean, I have 2 little cute little kids. I mean, I started late, much later. But, you know, my kids are 9 and 10. I think they're going to have a glorious world. I really do. They're going to have a world where they no longer have to worry so much about working in the fields or working in a factory or even doing mindless work, where they can be who they want to be. I think that, and especially if you're like us, if you're relatively advantaged, you can give your kids just about everything they need to be successful and have a great life. I think for you guys, the most important thing I always say is do something you love and you're good at. Figure out something you really like and that you're good at, and that you're not just doing to make a living. I freaking love what I do. My buddies, I'm a cyclist, and they're like, oh God, you have to go give a speech. Oh God, you have to go to someplace and consult, like Tulsa or Fresno, not Toronto. I'm like, it's great. I love it as much as being on the bike, and they think I'm insane. Like, I love it. I love going to cities and helping people in cities and helping them figure out their path to the future and how to remake themselves. It's amazing to be able to, and I think more and more of us will be able to do that. I think, yeah, given the affordability, it's not work, it's affordability. Given how expensive everything is, we have to work really. The only other choice is to move out of an expensive city to, you know, you can manage it differently. And one of the other advantages of digital technology and artificial intelligence is it does give the ability for a relatively large share of people, as much as 20% of the workforce overall, and probably 40% of knowledge workers, to make different choices about where they live. Not everyone can work remotely, but many more people can. So in other words, to create more life balance, if you don't want to spend as much for housing, is to live. But no, I think for you guys, learn how to use the technology, be expert in the technology, figure out things you really love to do and do them.
So the last question before we open it up to the floor is, if you had to leave everyone in the room with one thing to do or one thing to stop doing, what would it be? Well,
I mean, you can't stop it, so you have to stop. Like, if I can use this stuff, anyone can. I'm telling the truth. When you said the thing about I have no idea what you're talking about, so you're gonna have to help me. That's how little I know.
I'll send you
so if I can use the basic thing to help me in my work, everyone can. So don't be a Luddite. Don't take the pickaxe to the machine. Understand that this technology is important. Use it, and use it in a way that helps you. Be really careful, because over-reliance, and I mean, I'm giving you personal advice, over-reliance on AI could be a career killer, right? And you've seen it more among lawyers than anywhere else, where hallucinations ended careers. And for me, it's so funny. I used to spend all of my money on research teams and research capability and all of these. I don't have to do any of that, but you know where I'm spending it now? The best fact checkers in the world. I think if you're going to use a technology like this, you need a human or set of humans that can really help, because you can't, look, this isn't just AI. Some of the most eminent authors in the world have been caught plagiarizing because in assembling documents, somebody forgot to flag the quote, right? You've heard this time and time again. It wasn't malicious. These are not the malicious cases. Really eminent historians who didn't quote somebody, some research assistant or they did it in the evening and forgot to put quotes. I think making sure there's a process in place I think a silly thing is we ban you from using AI. You're going to use it. And especially for those of you who work in a firm and care about the reputation of a firm, making sure there are robust fact-checking protocols in place that will, and not just technology-based, not just the AI trackers, making sure that you're spending the kind of resources you need to spend that will catch any malicious or more likely inadvertent error. That's what I would say. That's the nature of how the games change. You can do more creative work. You can rely on technology to do more rote work. But at the end of the day, someone's got to check it and make sure it's correct.
Great conversation. Thank you, Richard. Trying to connect this back to some of your earlier work, if you could do one thing from a public policy perspective to make Toronto a world-class center for AI, what would that one thing be?
Well, I mean, I'm really worried about Toronto. What worries me is the people in my neighborhood that are Kathleen's age that are leaving, that I never saw before.
You can't afford your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And these people
to be totally honest.
And these people can afford my neighborhood, they're your age, and they're leaving in droves. There are different reasons for some of them, but it's a malaise that they feel. It's a malaise that they feel in the city, and it has a little bit to do with crime and vagrancy, but not that much. I think Toronto's got to get its mojo back, and I think it's one of the greatest cities in the world. I think it's a great city to raise a family, but somehow it's lost that mojo. You could blame a lot of things, the long lockdowns, you can blame contested political leadership at different levels, but yeah, I think that Toronto has an enormous, look, we don't get generative AI without Toronto, right? It all goes back to Jeffrey Hinton and his students. We've undercapitalized on that. And yeah, I think we need to really introspect about what we need to do. And we need to become an exciting place again. Like the city I moved to, it's not the city I moved to in 2007. I'm not trying to be difficult about that. It has a different mentality. And maybe the single biggest thing is the Torontonians need to be confident in themselves. Like I often find myself as an American who moved here defending Toronto against Torontonians who have lost confidence in their city. Yeah.
Oh.
I wrote a whole article in the Globe and Mail. I don't mean to inflict this on you, but yeah, about people leaving Toronto. I just think it's a great place. I think as in AI, it's one of probably a handful of places that can make it. So yeah, I think we should make that front and center.
I really thought you were going to lead with because of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Because they're such a disappointment, but we've got the Jays,
I think,
right?
I mean, I'm on record about this. I think the waterfront is our biggest opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've underestimated what we need to do. We need to get our act together. We need to make big investments. Need to stop complaining. If you look at any great city in the world today that has really restored its confidence, that has come from rebuilding its waterfront.
I agree.
And so I think the good thing is we still have so much to do. We have a lot to do, but we have a lot of space to do it right. Some parts of it, people would argue, are not what they love, but there are so many parts of that waterfront that could be done spectacularly well.
I just want to go back to the comments you made earlier around skills for the future. And I have that instinct often that it's the people skills that will be valuable. But I often question myself when I get that instinct because I think, is that not just based on what we know today and based on the world that we know today? And so I'm curious if you could recommend anyone who's sort of looking at this from the perspective of kind of just blue skying it. Like if we don't kind of make these assumptions about what skills are important, what might that look like for the future?
So we're trying to do this research. Trust, this is not easy. Like I've done a lot of hard things, isolating these skills. Like I was looking at the charts today, isolating the skills that matter. There are thousands of skills, right, that we collect data on in Canada and the United States. Isolating the ones that matter is really hard. I think we'll get there. But here's what I can tell you at a big picture level. When economists look at skills, they divide them into 3 buckets. The first bucket is physical skill, right? The ability to bend metal, tend the fields. Those bias big people, right? And are less biased against small people. But they're not so biased against places. In other words, those physical skills can be all kinds of places, big and small, urban and rural, suburban. You can put factories in all sorts of places and remote corners of the world. There are 2 kinds of skills that concentrate in bigger and bigger and bigger cities like Toronto. The first are cognitive skills. cognitive skills, the knowledge work skills, professional skills, management skills, law firms, business, investment, consultancy. But the social skills are the most concentrated in big cities over time. Those social skills, resource mobilization, not just be like friendly, but the ability to mobilize resources around your issues, the ability to build teams, to lead corporations, those tend to concentrate in the biggest places. So I think that gives me the clue that those skills will become more important. And then the ability, what we used to call at Carnegie Mellon, to structure an unstructured problem. The ability to take a problem that no one else has structured and put structure on it, whether that's to build a new enterprise, a new business, a new academic paper, a new field of inquiry. I think those two things, and what I'm being honest with you, trying to identify who has them and where they are, it's really hard. Hopefully I can come back here in a year or two and give you an answer, but that's something we're deeply involved in right now.
Thanks, Richard, for your comments around creativity in particular. Before I became a lawyer, I was an author and an editor first. And what we always talk about in that field is the voice. You're trying to bring that forward, find where the person is. Mm-hmm. AI is an incredibly useful tool, but by virtue of it being an aggregator, it dilutes and creates this fear of a gray goo homogenization in the output.
100%.
So as we look to leverage the incredible opportunity in the intellect of AI, how do we do that without sacrificing the soul of what we do?
So let me tell you, in my family, both my two daughters and my wife say, "Why are you yelling at your phone? Why are you yelling at your phone all day, Dad?" So I have written now 4 different ways, and this is voice. I wrote with a pen and a pencil. My hand couldn't keep up with my brain. Then I got a typewriter, and I hunt and peck, and it was a disaster, and the content was awful, and it spent most of the time trying to translate what I was trying to write. Then I got a word processor, and it did the same thing. The combination of voice and AI, to me, is the most single liberating technology I've ever seen. So I dictate into my phone, and then what do I say? Where's my voice? Where's my voice? Where's my style? Where's my tone? And what I found in using it is, of course, I have to take it offline and I have to edit it by hand, but I also can do it by yelling at it. That is not my voice and tone. Here's the way we would write that sentence. You dumb, sorry. Why are you doing it that way? That's not the way I would do it. So I think it does create gray goo, but I also think there's a way to use it as an interface, not as something that's aggregating, that you are using with your voice, telling it what to do that's faster, at least for me, that's faster than hunting and pecking. At the same time, you have to do it. But that idea of creating an idea and putting your voice around it, I think is true of everything. And what I think we need to train people to do is use AI not to just mush stuff together, but to use it to create their voice. I can tell you, and maybe I'm naive, I've never had such positive reaction to my writing. And I know it's because I'm not getting smarter. It's the reverse. It's because I'm finding a technology that allows me the freedom to find my voice better by limiting the grunt work and enabling me to focus on the voice and tone. But I think you've captured it with that one. It's really, what is your voice?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Richard. I have a question regarding the use of AI as we adapt to it more and more in our daily lives. In the current state of AI, it is very reactive. It does not project ideas. You have to ask a question in order to get an answer. And as we get more and more sucked into our computers and rely more on these tools, do you worry that we are progressively going into our own little boxes where we are not able to think outside those little ideas that we have already come up with?
Yeah, I think first I want to say where I think it's really good, before I get into this. My grade distribution before, it wasn't entirely this way, but a large part of my grade distribution was based on how well you could speak or write English. That's not right. There was a penalty to being in English as a second. I know it. I mean, I hated it. I tried to react against it. But Now what AI does, just as a tool to make your grammar and language better, it creates a much bigger leveling for people who might come. So that's the first thing. I think the problem with AI that you're getting at is it's technology that further isolates us. I think you're getting at something quite profound that I hadn't thought about till you said this. If I can work almost completely independently now, and I can, that doesn't make me a better human. It makes me a more isolated human. And there's so many things in our lives. Now, you wouldn't think it. I'm a very introverted person. I don't like big social gatherings. I like to be by myself. That's why I'm an author, right? You don't do that job unless you're nuts or an introvert. But I think you're right. It creates your bubble. And previous technologies, not that I'm a Marxist, Marx's greatest insight, the one insight because I studied philosophy, the one insight that Marx had, that no other philosophers had, is that all of life is social production. It's a really important insight. We all depend on each other for something. Whether we're on a farm or in a factory, there's a division of labor which is social. What AI, I think, does is it enables the individual to do more of that social process. That's worrying. So, yeah, you can then see why our society is growing more alienated. It's growing more isolated. Our kids are more isolated. Then I think that's a really profound thing. How do we make sure that our society remains connected and not isolated? Because once that happens, many of the problems we have today just get magnified. Really important insight.
Thank you so much for joining us.
You're great.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned for the next episode.